So this is my full story on why I came back to the Catholic faith. I have a couple videos about this, talking about this on like my Instagram, my TikTok, and that kind of stuff. But wanted to make a full in-depth video of why I came back. So taking it all the way back to the time when I was in the womb, which you're going to see why this is important later, which I remember this time deeply. But my mom at 27, about 2 to 3 months into the pregnancy, learned that she had precancerous cells in her cervix. Now my mom didn't normally like getting checked up down there because she didn't like, a doctor being, down there. But now that she had a child and she had me, she had to make sure everything is okay with me. But as a result, the doctors found cervical precancer and told her that it was actually a good thing that she came in, because sometimes what can happen is if you don't find out about it soon, it can, really grow into a very aggressive state to where it can be a real problem and very life-threatening. Now, the doctor said she had 2 options. Either they can go and get rid of the precancer now, which would put me at risk and she might lose the baby as a result of the procedure, or she can run the risk of waiting until I'm born and she could have more, an invasive cervical cancer. And at the time she thought, well, if I end up getting serious cancer and possibly die, then I've had 27 years of life and this baby has had none. And obviously that baby was me. So because she didn't want to put my life in jeopardy, she decided to forego treatment. And about 5 to 6 months later, and I was born, and she ended up needing to have a hysterectomy, and she only has her ovaries now. So she became infertile at 27 as a result. So if she never would have had me, she probably wouldn't have known about the cancer until later on, until, it was more serious. And if my mom hadn't decided to forego treatment, I might not be here either. So in terms of natural life, my mom saved my life and I hers. So I say all this to show how even from before I was born, how much love my mom has for me and the kind of relationship we have. So I was baptized Catholic a little after a year I was born, and I'm Mexican, and my entire mom's side is Mexican, so there's a very rich Catholic background in that side of the family. My uncle, who is my godfather, is Catholic. My grandma's Catholic. My great grandma's Catholic, and before her, and so on and so forth. Just Catholicism within my family. Like, I've heard stories about my great grandma waking up and praying the rosary before all the kids get up. Also, on my father's side, they're predominantly Polish, which is a very Catholic country. So Catholicism is in my blood, and I kind of make the joke now that there's no way I couldn't be Catholic, being a Mexican Polak. But my parents got divorced when I was 3, so I grew up in a split household growing up, where I would go, Monday, Tuesday, mom, then Wednesday, Thursday, dad, and then mom the weekend, and then it would flip-flop where dad would have me the next weekend, And growing up, I remember we went to the Catholic Church until I was about 6 or 7. All right. No, until I was about that age, before I could receive my first communion. And not going into personal details, my mom wanted to get married to my stepdad in the church and wasn't able to as a result of one of the deacons there, so that really pushed her away when I was around, 7, 8 years old, something like that, somewhere around 6 to 8 years old, something like that. Also, I had baseball on the weekends, which was kind of another excuse of we play games on Saturdays and Sundays, so we don't really have time, this, and that, right? But I grew up in a home where basically our religious views were like, hey, just believe in God and be a good person, and that's kind of what Christianity and what, life is all about. But there was never really a deep description of what exactly does believe in God mean practically? And we kind of viewed hyper-religious people as unfairly judgmental and kind of, holier than thou. My mom kind of had the mentality of I don't need to go to church to believe in God and be a good person. That's ridiculous. Like a God knows my heart kind of thing, So growing up, my life was pretty much consumed by, baseball, school, and girls, the typical American stuff. But when I was around 11, my dad moved to Minnesota, and that was really hard on me. I kind of didn't really understand why that was going on. I love my dad a ton, and for him to move, I was like, why? And this video is not about the shortcomings of my father, and me and my dad are totally reconciled now, but it's important because that just, it brought me and my mom even closer together than we already were. But I was always curious about things growing up, why are we here? What's the point of life? Is there God? These are these very basic and these questions that every human kind of goes through. And honestly, I just kind of thought that God was just this idea that kind of everybody accepted and believed in, as I grew up in a society and family that were all believers. But I remember when I was 16-ish, my dad had visited, and he brought one of his friends, and me and his friend, we kind of got into a little bit of a conversation, and me in my ignorance, because I didn't really understand what believing in God meant, he asked me, Carson, are you a Christian? And I said, yeah, I am. And he goes, so you believe in God? I go, yep, I believe in God. He goes, so that means you believe in this God that's all-knowing? I go, yep. So he knows what you're going to do before you do it. And I go, yep. And he goes, well then, Carson, how do you have any free will to actually make your decisions if he knows exactly what you're going to do before you do it? And at the time that stumped me. I didn't really know the answer. But obviously now I would have answered that question a little bit differently with basically the simple fact that just because God knows what I'm going to do before I do it doesn't mean that I don't have the free will choice to do it. Like I can know the sun's going to rise tomorrow, but that doesn't mean I'm forcing the sun to rise. Or I can put, a piece of chicken in front of my dog and the dog goes and grabs it. It doesn't mean that I'm, now controlling the dog and the dog doesn't have actually like a free choice to like go and grab it, you know what I mean? Or that I'm like puppeteering the dog, you know what I mean, to like force it to go and grab the chicken. And on the flip side, if you just believe that we're all biological bags of stuff and that there's nothing more to us than matter and energy, then why should I believe I even have a free will at all? I mean, when a lion bites its trainer and kills him or her, do we look at the lion and go, well, Mr. Lion, we know you had control over your impulses, and the fact that you bit your trainer, we're actually going to put you on trial because you know that that's something that you should not have done and you should have acted against your base desires. No, we don't think that because we understand that animals are slaves to their biology, and which is why we don't put animals on trial and hold them accountable in the same way we do humans. I mean, from the atheist perspective, I am just an overgrown ape. But nonetheless, at that age, I was stumped by that question, and it kind of got me thinking, like, is this like believe in God stuff, like real? Or is this just some fairy tale kind of created by humans? But because my family would have thought that I was a bastard child and absolutely insane if I told them that I was going to be an agnostic or an atheist, I kind of put away that side for a little bit and honestly kind of thought that I might be like, by the time I was 22 or 23, that I would be, an atheist and kind of just face the music that this God stuff is probably fake. So fast forward to when I'm 18, about to turn 19. It's the summer before my freshman year. And I had come across some of those Sneeko live streams. I don't know if y'all remember those, where he used to be in his like apartment in New York. But on the live stream, he kind of started to talk about some of this like satanic stuff that people, who run the world, the kind of stuff they do behind the scenes. And one of those things was the Bohemian Club at the Bohemian Grove in Monterey, California. And if you don't know what that is, just go and look it up. It's literally a bunch of former presidents and CEOs, this club where they were caught on tape going into the forest sacrificing fake babies to Molech, which Molech is an Old Testament pagan deity associated with child sacrifice, basically a demon. And as I was watching some of this stuff, I'm like, why is all like the evil in the world that is being done always associated with these like, biblical themes, right? These biblical characters. Why is it always against Jesus specifically? Which piqued my interest in Christianity. And I kind of started having more of these thoughts of like, is this really the point of life? Like baseball and trying to like hook up with girls and like try and make as much money. Like, is that really what life is all about? So I discovered some videos from like Cliff Connectley, William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, and it really piqued my interest in going like, man, I think that Christianity is true. But it also kind of led me into some of their thoughts on Catholicism, which actually swayed me to be like, I don't know if Catholicism is really true. Not in the sense of it being like completely evil, but just kind of sort of off. And I remember I would say, the Catholic Church is the first church. It's just been corrupted, which if I understood what that meant, especially how I do now, if that's true, the Catholic Church is the first church, then it is the true church. Because how could Jesus's church that he founded be corrupted? I mean, it would make Jesus a liar to say that the gates of hell have prevailed against the church and that the Holy Spirit has not led the church that Jesus started. But when one of my buddies on my baseball team said, hey, you want to come to church with me? I was like, sure. And he brought me to a non-denominational church. And I remember I left the house that day wearing these like red NASA shorts. My mom goes, you're going to church in shorts? Because she had, this, Catholic upbringing. And I was like, yeah. And at the time I thought she was okay with me going to this non-denominational place, but she really wasn't. She just didn't want to make it a problem. But she also kind of thought, hey, I haven't been to church in freaking over 10 years. So why should I be, judging him? At least he's going to somewhere, going to church somewhere. And my first time going to this non-denominational service, I really did feel like I felt the presence of God. I remember actually tearing up there because I had this feeling of like I've been looking for something that's actually substantive in life. You know what I mean? Something that is real, and it felt like it was like what I had felt when I was real little at that Catholic church. You know what I mean? I was like, man, this is different. Now, obviously, I don't think that means, non-denominationalism is true. I believe that God works through, fallen things to bring people back to the truth. It was like a stepping stone that would bring me closer to the truth of Catholicism. But that experience got me further into Christianity. But one of the problems I had from the beginning was like, I want this to make sense. This has to be logical. Like I don't want to believe lies. I just really wanted to have answers to the questions I had about God and about Jesus. Jesus, namely that one about how do I have any free will to make choices if God already knows what I'm going to do. So my buddy on the baseball team's like, hey, dude, we got to go check out this, like, new church. Like it's for young kids, it's for college kids. And I was like, dude, I really like the other place. And he's like, no, bro, you got to check this out. It's at a concert venue. You know what I mean? Like it's dope. And I was like, all right, bro. And it was right after my 19th birthday that we went there. And keep in mind, I'm wanting to understand the evidence for Christianity, right? Like I'm wanting to get into more of what I didn't know at the time, the apologetics side of this. And the first service I attended there was literally on the evidence for the classical understanding of God. And I was like, that is way too coincidental to be, an accident. So again, another stepping stone, bringing me closer to Catholicism. So you probably know how it goes at non-denom churches. I made a profession of faith. They baptized me. And because it wasn't an actual baptism, I'd already been baptized as a baby. But I remember even after that, I still had doubts about Christianity, But as I kept living out the faith, that kind of slowly started to fade away, these atheist, agnostic objections. And then 6 months later, I kind of came across these videos of Muslims saying how, hey, Christians have been lying to you. Jesus didn't claim to be God. He's just a prophet. Look how he doesn't know the day or the hour. Like, Jesus isn't God. Like, you've been duped. And that got me insecure, thinking like, dang, am I wrong? But as I saw from the New Testament how Jesus unmistakably claims to have equality with God, those objections slowly started to fade away. But ever since I started to inquire about Christ, there was always this thought of like, man, is Catholicism true? Which, by the way, that never left, and that's because I was baptized as a baby. As a baby, sanctifying grace and the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity were infused into my soul. I've had that indelible mark since I was a baby. This is why, I've always had this, Catholicism bug in my brain, But very shortly after my, my baptism, 6 months to a year later, I had a conversation with my uncle where he basically showed me hey, scripture on the Eucharist, confession, a view of the Petrine See, also, the view of the fathers on these issues, as well as answering my objections such as why do you guys pray to saints? And I didn't really have an answer. And it was the first time that I had really thought man, I think I'm wrong and I need to rethink this stuff about Catholicism. If I continue in this, I don't think I can live in heresy and be saved. But because I'm stubborn, I went back and I watched videos and studied and really wanted to disprove the Catholic faith. And I would have arguments with my uncle, for hours and hours on the phone. And to be honest, a lot of my time as a non-denominational or professing non-denominational was just trying to satisfy this Catholic conscience, Outwardly, I would put on this persona of just this confidence of yeah, Catholicism isn't true. That's dumb. But internally, I was conflicted because I really did have a love for Jesus. And to be fair to the non-denominationals, right? That was really instilled in my heart because of them. At least, reinstalled into my heart, I guess. But I just want to know the truth. And that is a blessing and a curse because Jesus says to whom much is given, much is required. So the more that you know, the more you're going to be held accountable. I remember going on my first mission trip with this non-denom church out to San Diego State. I remember we met a guy, Catholic dude, and he started talking to us about Eucharistic miracles. And I left that conversation feeling very, very insecure and oh my gosh, I'm wrong, dude. And I tried to reason against it, argue oh, that's from Satan, and, just kind of ignored it. And I had quite a few of those moments. I remember I would have times of sleeping in my bed and praying, being God, I feel like this Catholicism stuff is true. Just if it's true, Lord, just tell me, I want to know. And the first answer would always be immediately, yes. Then the second answer was, no, Carson, just follow Jesus. And it's like those two things are incompatible. I remember I was playing piano in the non-denom worship band one time, and I remember thinking to myself, Lord, if this is not true and I shouldn't be here, you tell me right now and I'll leave, right now. And I remember getting that feeling of yeah, Carson, you got to leave. And I didn't leave. I didn't go. But the more I learned, the more I understood the view of the fathers on these topics within Christianity, the more I realized that my views were incompatible with their faith. The first thing that stuck out and was really irreconcilable was my view on baptism. I'd be playing piano during the baptisms at the non-denom church, and they would say, this baptism doesn't save. It's Jesus that saves. And as I began to understand how baptism is one of those things that the early church really agreed upon in terms of how it's a regenerative thing, I began to see how that theology is problematic because it makes baptism something that is separate from Jesus and how he gives us the grace of God. And I started to see that rather, baptism does save, as 1 Peter 3 says, but ultimately baptism saves not because it's just a mechanical washing, but because Christ saves us through the waters of baptism. How it is truly salvific and it's for the forgiveness of sins. This is how it's said in the Nicene Creed, and all the fathers, literally, and I'm not exaggerating, they all viewed it as regenerative, at least in the first millennium. The only people who didn't hold to this in the first millennium were Gnostics and Manichaeans and Messalians and Pelagians. which are all extremely heterodox groups. So this made me question, if they're all wrong on baptism regeneration, right, for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, and the entire church was teaching heresy, then how can I believe Jesus' promise that the Holy Spirit will lead the church? I mean, how is that not showing that the gates of hell have prevailed? Which, if that's true, that would make Jesus a liar, and I obviously can't believe that. But even with that, I could still go Lutheran, or Presbyterian. I didn't have to go necessarily Catholic or Orthodox. However, apostolic succession, a valid confection of the Eucharist by a validly ordained minister, sacrament of confession, intercession of the saints in the sense of praying to them, right, asking for their intercession to God, just as they had done on earth, church ecclesiology. These were things that were specific to Catholicism and Orthodoxy, where I was like, okay, I can't stay Protestant and have those things. And by the way, all this wasn't overnight. This was over the course of 3 years. And during that time, if this is conviction and this is pride, right? I was probably at the beginning like this, very, very much conviction of this non-denominationalism is very true. And as the time went on, as I, up to my reversion point, it just went like this. But I kind of kept it hidden from everybody, I didn't let anybody know that I was having these internal thoughts. I think I maybe let one person know, or maybe two people know a couple times, but it was very minimal. But I would just do anything to not, face this noise of the truth of Catholicism, there'd be times where I didn't want to pray because I felt like I was going to get convicted in prayer by God. Because I would always pray, Lord, lead me to the truth. And the more that he would, the more I was like, I can't go to God saying, lead me, to the truth when I feel like he's been doing it and I've been rejecting it. I mean, I would pass by a Catholic church and it would remind me of the convictions that I was having. And I would purposely either avoid them or as I passed them, not look at them. And I was like, well, Carson, if you really are convicted as a non-denominational, right, then you should have no problem. You shouldn't be having these feelings. If that's a false Christianity, then why am I bothered? And as I learned more, I would not even invite Catholic or Orthodox Christians to the non-denom because I felt like I was bringing them, away from something that was more true, which again was internally conflicting. If I believe this is the truth and you guys are false, then it's my duty to bring you here. And there are just so many examples of during that time where I was basically just living out a contradiction and was just flat out wrong. And I knew it. But I would just convince myself that I was okay and just hold on to this, little shred of doubt that I had. I was basically doing what the Apostle Paul says people do in Romans 1. I was suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. But a big part that I'm leaving out is as a result of me being a very zealous, professing non-denominational, my mom got back into the Catholic Church. She got married to my stepdad in the church. He received his baptism, first communion, first confession, confirmation, and then obviously holy matrimony to my mom. And my mom changed a lot as a result of the Catholic Church, in terms of temperament and lifestyle, and same with my stepdad. And as she started to get deeper into the faith, she realized how serious it was that I was choosing not to be Catholic, to not go to Mass, right? Or not being a professing Catholic, as I was already Catholic by baptism. And she would pray for me incessantly to come back to the faith, right? Every Mass, she said she would pray to the Blessed Mother and ask for her intercession to bring me back to the church. Because she understood that if I kept going as a non-denominational, right, and knowing what I know, not being, as invincibly ignorant, I would probably go to hell. I mean, she loves me more than anything, so naturally she did that. And naturally I would argue with her about the faith, you know what I mean? And we would go back and forth. But even I kind of knew, even if she, left the Catholic faith and came to the, non-denom church where I was going, I knew that, I didn't want her to do that. I knew internally, I was like, yeah, that's not, if that happens, that's not good. But I was just so committed to the worldview that I had adopted that you probably could have given me any argument and I probably wouldn't have come back to the church. I was just so deep in pride that I wanted to, I would do anything to turn off that conscience, in my brain that was telling me to come back to the Catholic Church. I even left my parents' house to go live with a bunch of, non-denominational guys, a very, a non-denominational frat house. And my mom really didn't want me to go because she knew if I left and went and lived with them, it would just push me further away from the church, But in the middle of the night, I believe it was April, I left, I packed up all my stuff, my clothes and some other things, and left to that other house. And my mom knew I was moving out soon. She just didn't know when. So when she woke up and saw that all my stuff was gone, she called me and was, sobbing and crying on the phone, saying Carson, why did you leave? This and that. So I made up some excuse of I thought it would be okay. Hey, you're going to see me. I'm going to come and get my bed. I thought I'd just, move it now and I'll be back soon. But I knew why I left. It's because I didn't want to deal with the conscience of I am really hurting my mom by doing this. And I didn't want to deal with the nagging and her telling me not to leave. But this really affected me. I remember my first couple days living there, she sent me a message of Carson, you can come back. I love you. You don't have to go. Please just come home, right? And I went into my buddy's room, and because I knew the pain it was bringing her, I broke down crying in front of him. I just knew how badly it was hurting her, and I understood that it was because of me, this woman who loves me more than anything would do anything for me. I mean, even when I left disobeying her request, right, to not have me leave, she sent me with, food, toiletries, money, even bought me a desk and was paying for stuff like my phone bill, medical and dental, car repairs, and a whole bunch of other things. That just shows you how much she loves me. And shortly thereafter, I also got this tattoo, Ephesians 2:8-9, tattooed on my arm. And I got this basically in rebellion to the Catholic Church because I was like, yeah, this shows that, I believe I'm saved by faith, and they believe they're saved by works, which I even knew was not true. I just got it as another thing to just distance myself, But the thing is Ephesians 2:8-9 does not mean that we don't have to cooperate with the grace of God, or that works done through God's grace do nothing for our justification. Because James 2 says that Abraham's faith was completed by works and that he was justified by works and not by faith alone. And the work James says Abraham was justified by was his offering of Isaac up on the altar, which was before no men but God. So it wasn't just this, ceremonial work of the Mosaic law or something to do to appear righteous before men. I mean, even in Psalm 106, verses 30-31, we see how Phinehas stood up and intervened, and it was credited to him for righteousness. So Scripture itself can connect a righteous act being done and that being credited to righteousness for a person. So if we interpret not because of works in Ephesians 2:8 as meaning no work ever can have any meaning towards justification, then we create a serious problem, as there are verses that show that works complete faith, justify people, and can credit someone righteousness. This is why I conveniently left out verse 10, because it says we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, for good works which God prepared beforehand so that we should walk in them. And we don't perform these works independently of God, and if we choose not to do them, we can't still accept to be saved, because it's we should, or as some translations say, we would walk in them, and we can't just choose not to do commands of God. What the Apostle Paul is denying here is not that works done in the Spirit have nothing to do with our justification, but that salvation isn't the result of our own doing, or that it originates from ourselves in such a way that would give us grounds to boast before God. This is why in the Council of Trent in Session 6 in Canon 1, it says that if anybody thinks that they can be justified by their own natural power or that of the law, they're anathema. However, did I think that back then? No, of course not. I was just so deep within that non-denominational place, I was just looking for anything, to separate myself from Catholicism and just get this, Catholic conscience out of my mind. I mean, I had been there for nearly 3 years. Like, I knew everybody there. I had friends there. I played piano there. I went on mission trips. I was deep within the church. I was living at a house with all my buddies where I had freedom. I had my friends. And I knew that if I did the hard thing and came back to the Catholic faith, I would lose all that, basically. So I desperately just clung to anything that could justify me not reverting. But that all changed January 29th. So about 2 to 3 days prior, before January 29th, I had this, lunch with my grandparents, because they give all the kids the money that they've been raising for them since they were little when they turned 22. And my grandma gave me this check, and she told me the story about how there was this, famous lady, she converted to Catholicism on her deathbed. And it made me think, like, if I was on my deathbed, right, and a priest came in the room and offered me, confirmation, confession, the Eucharist, extreme unction, would I say no? I mean, if I truly believe what I'm saying I believe, then I have to, right? I have to say no. But I knew deep down, if that actually happened, no, I wouldn't say no. I think that I'd tell him, yeah, I think I got to become Catholic, or not become Catholic, right? But fully submit to the Catholic Church, as I already was Catholic, baptized Catholic, you know what I'm saying? So my grandparents gave me this check, and I put it in my little phone wallet, and I didn't realize that you can deposit checks online. I didn't know that at the time, thank God, because I called my mom. This was Thursday night. This would have been January 29th, Thursday night, and I called her and I said, "Hey Mom, can I come over real quick? I gotta give you this check. I don't want to lose it." And in her mind, she was like, "Dang, it's like 10:30 at night. Like, I'm trying to go to sleep. I'll just tell him, you can freaking deposit this online, you dumb." But my mom didn't do that because she loves me, and she's like, she always wanted to, if she could see me, she always wanted to. So she was like, "Yeah, sure, come over." And while I was driving over there, I had this inclination of like, Carson, just like tell your mom, like, hey, you've been seeing how people have been converting to Catholicism and Orthodoxy. You've been seeing videos, seeing stuff of apologetics, and you're seeing like why this makes sense, you know what I mean? And you're having this conviction, and just ask your mom to pray for you, right? So I did. I told her that. And I also told her, Mom, seeing how much you've changed as a result of Catholicism has really changed my heart and really softened it when it comes to the Catholic Church. And at that, I hugged her, and I started weeping, like out of nowhere, unexpectedly, like sobbing. And this is very odd for me because I'm not a very big crier. So this kind of, this meant a lot to me. And she goes, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "I don't know," but I knew why. And it's because I just had this wall of pride and arrogance for so long. I was denying the Spirit of God for so long, and I knew it, that when I finally opened up to God, and it was through, my mom, right, who loves me more than anything, who literally almost died for me, I couldn't, like, my heart couldn't take it. And I left the house, and I realized I forgot my keys. So I ran back into the house, and I go back in, and I see my mom, and she's kneeling before the Divine Mercy photo that we have in the house. and praying for me, which, by the way, this is why the profile picture on my social is what it is. But as I leave and I'm driving home, my mom, she gets on Life 360 because she wants to make sure I get home safe. I mean, her son was just emotional in her arms. She's like, I want to make sure he's okay. So to pass the time, she goes on Facebook, and the first thing that pops up on her Facebook page, no scrolling, is the story of St. Monica and St. Augustine. And this is what the post was. And if you don't know the story, I'll describe it briefly. So St. Augustine was born in the late 4th century, and he had a very devout Christian mother who brought him up in the faith. And later on, he would basically go into this heretical sect called the Manichaeans and live this kind of, hedonistic lifestyle. And the Manichaeans, they believed in this kind of dualist theology of this eternal light and this eternal, darkness, like eternal good and eternal bad. They were kind of similar to the Gnostics in the sense that, they believed that you needed to have this special revelation of light and dark to be saved. They even rejected the Old Testament. So his mom, St. Monica, naturally would pray for him all the time to come back to the faith. And because of her prayers, he did. He was baptized at 33 and became one of the greatest, Christian theologians and philosophers and thinkers ever. I mean, he's a doctor of the church. So on the night where I broke down in front of my mom crying, the one who's been praying for me to come back to the faith, right? And I tell her basically I'm thinking about coming back to the church. That post pops up on her Facebook page first thing. So she sends me that the next morning, and I was just in shock. And I called her the next morning as I'm driving jiu-jitsu, and I'm like, Mom, this is insane. And I'm holding this rosary she had given me and hung in my car, and basically made me hang it in my car. And I'm holding it crying with her on the phone, oh my gosh, this is wild. So after that, I was like, well, I have 3 options. Either 1, this is a really crazy coincidence. 2, this is a work of Satan. Or 3, this is a work of God. And there's no way I could believe in the first option. And the second option, I couldn't sit there and go, well, this experience that I had with my mom, who loves me more than anything and literally is connected to 2 saints of the church in a very miraculous kind of way of bringing me back to the faith that I was raised in. There's no way that this could be a work of Satan. To think it was a work of Satan for me was very similar to how the Pharisees would say that Jesus casts out demons by the spirit of Beelzebub, rather by the power of Beelzebub. So after jiu-jitsu had ended, I went back to the non-denominational house, and I knew I had to leave. I couldn't stay there and be Catholic at the same time. I understood that it would, hinder my journey back to the Catholic faith. So I went downstairs and I wrote down all my thoughts, and I'm shaking writing it, just I don't want to do this. And it wasn't a whole debate thing. It was rather just telling them what happened last night and why I'm leaving. So I went upstairs and I broke the news. And they were pretty shocked, but one of my roommates, who literally was the guy that I was living with in the same room, he was kind of giving me this look of almost I'm kind of proud of you, Carson. You're finally actually doing something, the right thing. But I packed all my stuff up and I moved out. And this was a Friday, and I was actually scheduled to play piano on Sunday for the non-denom church. And I texted the planning guy. I was like, hey, dude, some crazy stuff has just happened, and I'm not going to that non-denom church anymore, and I will be playing this Sunday. Sorry, man, I want to let you know as soon as possible. And that Sunday, which was February 1st, I went to Mass for the first time, of my own volition, and it just felt like the chains of just pride and and arrogance, were just coming off. I felt free. For the first time in a while, I really felt like I was doing what God wanted me to do. I was exactly where God wanted me to be. And I remember looking at the iconography in the room and just being overwhelmed. And I remember I almost forgot to genuflect before I walked into the pew. And I was like, crap, I got to make sure I look like I know what I'm doing here, But I met up with the priest there and told him all that happened. And shortly thereafter, I received my first confession, was confirmed, First Communion, and that was this past Easter Vigil. So it's pretty quick for me, thankfully. The priest there, he kind of, heard my whole story and understood where I was at personally and spiritually, and he was like, yeah, Carson, there's no way you should have to wait, a year to receive the sacraments. It's pretty crazy looking back at it now and seeing how God's mercy and his plan are so perfect, and how much mercy he's given me. I mean, I spent so long denying the Catholic faith, and leading people away from it. Now, to be fair, I wasn't as anti-Catholic as some, I didn't believe the whole, the Church of the Whore of Babylon, and, you pray to Mary, you pray to a demon, and this kind of stuff. But looking back, God's hand was in it all. Like how without me and without my mom, we probably wouldn't have even natural life. And now, because of me being a very zealous non-denominational, it brought my mom back into the church, and her prayers brought me back into the church, and now, God willing, spiritual life even, more than even natural life. He has been in complete control. And the fact that he's given me so much mercy is kind of weird to think about. Like God didn't have to reveal himself in such an explicit and undeniable way to me. It's pretty nuts. Thinking about it, the verse that I got on my arm, Ephesians 2:8 and 9, the last Sunday service that I went to at the non-denom church before I had this big reversion moment with my mom, It was on Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Literally the verse that I got in rebellion to the Catholic Church is the verse that we're going over the weekend before I have this huge reversion moment back to the church that I was rebelling. I mean, coincidental timing? No. So that's my testimony why I came back to the church. If you made it this far, please be praying for me. Like and share this, I guess, or you don't have to. It's fine. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted to tell you guys my story and hope this is edifying, at least to someone. But keep praying for me that I keep running the race and that I keep fighting the good fight. God bless y'all. Glory be to Jesus.